Hello, and welcome to another FHIR for Developers tutorial video. My name is Gino Canessa, and today we are continuing on our quest for using profiles and validation, and hopefully building up some patterns that we can use to make them easier to work with the eventual goal of automating generating those, because that's what we like to do as developers. So with that, there's, as always, a lot to do. Let's jump right in. I'm back here in our same project that we've been working in here for a few sessions, this FHIR CS Profiling Basic. Right now where we left it is that we have the patient as it is. We can use the patient profile set and clear, and we have the US Core birth sex extension working. And that's a simple extension, which is to say it's only has the value in it. We can actually pull up US Core here. So we can see birth sex is a code value type, and these are complex types. We'll get into those here in a second. But we have some nice code with an enum, and we can use it to set and clear things. And just to make sure, if we build our project and run it, and it does work, and everything validates correctly. So that's good. But now let's get into one of these complex extensions. And up here we did pick race. Probably not the best thing, but that is what we have here. So let's use it. We're going to want to create some shim code similar to the birth sex, but we're going to have to do a few things differently. So let's start by creating our file. So this would be US Core race, yep, and I always forget this here, .cs. Sorry, when you jump back and forth between IDEs, that is what happens. What I'm actually going to do is copy from birth sex first, just to save us some typing. So here we want US Core race, because that's what we want, and let's make sure we update. I'm going to go ahead and grab, I think I have the extensions here. Let's see if I can find the right one. There we go. This is our US Core race extension. So let's copy the URL and paste it in here. And let's also get that same URL here, because that is the extension URL. This should actually have one of those on the end, although it does resolve. And pretty much we can just get rid of everything else for now. Yeah, that feels fair. We'll keep the clear because we can just change clear, because that is all we have to do. And that's pretty straightforward. Let's take a look. What we're going to look at here is this US Core race extension. And where we were saying before, it's a complex extension. So you can see what it actually does is it has 3 values. So instead of putting the value here, you have to create 3 other extensions. One for OMB category, one for detailed, and one for text. It's a pretty awkward structure to work with, but the idea here is if you have values that are related to each other in such a way that you really need them to always be together, this is how you do it. So if you have, this text is explaining the OMB categories, and especially here the OMB categories and the details need to both exist. You want to make sure if you delete one, you're deleting both, and if you're looking for one, you find both, all those kinds of things. And so this is the structure you use to do it. So we're going to need to build a little bit more complicated of a structure than we had before. So the first thing is we will want, let's see, we already have a clear, because that was, again, trivially easy if we just want to remove it. And it would almost be better to change this to remove, but I don't feel like changing our structure right now. That's the kind of thing, especially if we do end up getting to code generation, it's trivial to do there, so I'm not going to worry about it here. Now, in here, what we did is US core birth sex set. So let's do the same thing. Public static void US core race set. And what do we need? Well, we know we need this patient because we want to do the same thing. We want to have this be an extension on the patient. And then let's look at what's in here. Well, we have text, and that's easy. That's a scalar, and it's just a string text. So you can see it's a value string, and so that one's going to be pretty straightforward, and it is mandatory. So we definitely want to have that in here. And then we're going to need something for OMB category and something for detailed. Now, these are actually both codings. So if we wanted to be kind of the simplest case to code first, we could just say something like IEnumerable, let's use list. Do I like list better? No, if you have an array of them, you might want to pass that in, and I don't think it'll matter for what we're doing here. And we could do OMB coding, and we can do IEnumerable of coding for detailed. So this would give us everything we want here. Now, the trick is if we go and look at these OMB race categories, let's see, this is the detailed race. That's not what we want. We want the race categories. Put them in the right order so that we find the right one. And you can see there's actually only a few values here. There's 5 values plus the 2 null flavors. And that's actually why, if you look here, we can see that it only allows up to 5 elements to be here regardless. Because at most you're supposed to have each of these once, and there's only 5 distinct values other than the null flavors, which are obviously less than the 5. So I think in this case we probably make sense to do the enum for this one and not do the enum for this one. And the reason why we don't want to do that for the other one is because this one has quite a lot of values. And I don't think we want to type those in. And really, I don't know that we would want to code generate all of that. Just because the amount of code that would be here as we start adding extensions would be growing quite a bit. So, and this will let us showcase kind of the 2 different ways of doing some of these things. So for now, let's go ahead and do that. We're going to need to create an enum to do this, and actually let's do, since these are optional, let's add that as well right now. So this is again just here, we can see it's 0 to 5 and 0 to star, and so we do need a text, but we don't need anything else, and that will let us do that so that it stops yelling at us. And we can say add a US core race extension with the specified values. So let's add or replace. There we go. All right. And we can worry about those in a minute. Now the enum, and again we did this over here on birth sex that we just made a set of them. I would type them in, but there's actually just a little bit more typing than on the birth sex just because of the flavor that I will show you here. And let me just copy it because I typed this up as I was prepping. And so it takes a little bit longer to actually type this set in because you can see we want to track the code, the system, and the definition. And so those are just values I was typing in from this page. You can see there's a code, a system, a display, and a definition. And we'll actually use the displays here in a minute. But when I was typing this in, I realized how long it takes to actually copy and paste all of these fields. And again, the goal is to get to some sort of generation that we don't have to type these in. But in the meantime, I had to, and there's no reason for you to sit there and watch me do it. So now we can pass in just a list of these codings. And that's great, because now we have just a list of them that we can use nicely. So what do we want to do here? Really, we want to start with our null checks, because if our patient is null, we want to throw a new argument null exception, because really we have nothing to do. If we have a null patient, we're not going to really be able to do much. We know that the text needs to be there, and in FHIR, a string value needs to have something. So really we want to do the same type of thing. So we want to do string.isNull or empty text, and if that's the case, we want to throw a new argument null exception with the name of our text field. Now, there's also an argument that could be made for using the isNull or white space. Technically, strings are allowed to have just white space. However, if you try and ever use XML with them, then it'll likely blow up. So in our case, we're using JSON. That's kind of what I use by default, and that's I won't say that's one of the reasons why, but it is a nice benefit. So there's an argument to be made either way, just the kind of thing to be aware of. In this case, I'm only going to care if it's null or empty, because everything we're doing behind can handle just white space if we want. Now, if we look in our program, we're already doing a lot of this. So let's go ahead and grab this code so we can have it as a point of reference. And even though we're going to delete it, we'll do that. And we'll comment it out so that we can just use it as reference. In this case, we said we're going to add or replace, so we can do pretty similar here. We can grab our extension, we can create a new extension, and US for race extension. Let's name it a little nicer since we're in here. And we have our extension URL. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to create it with a null as the value, because remember, when we come to look at this, we can see we're not allowed to have a value. You can either have extensions or a value, but not both. So we're going to use null, and then we're going to start adding everything else. Since we know text is mandatory, that's probably, and we'll go ahead and comment since this is all example code, create our parent US for race extension object. Null, because we will have extensions, not a value. Okay, so from here we can go ahead and use one of the nice helper functions here just to add. Oops, we don't want to add though, because well, since we just created it, we do know it's empty, but we want to get in the habit of saying set. Probably the performance is slightly better if we do an add instead of a set, because it's not doing the lookup. But if we end up moving our code around and reusing it in something that's updating, this will help. And I'm going to go ahead and actually define some additional constants here. And these are just going to be used, they could be. We'll make them public for now because we're just doing an example project anyway. And so now what these are additional URLs, but we want to do something like URL OMB, and I'm just looking at these. So we have OMB category, detailed, and text. URL OMB category, and it's just OMB category. And we can do the same thing, URL detailed, and it's lowercase, and URL text. And and it's probably yelling at us about comments. So we can go and grab US core race extension extension text field, and we can just put these on OMB category and detailed. Perfect. So that'll make our life here a little better. So we say we want to set the URL text, and we want to pass in the text that we have here. Set text to replace, since it is mandatory one-to-one. Now this is yelling at us because we actually need to do a new FHIR string of text. Because text could be any number of values if we just pass it a string, and here we're specifically saying make it a FHIR string. So that's good. That was the unfortunately the easy one. So next we need to go and start adding in, we'll actually add our details first and come back up and add our categories, because that'll be a little more complicated. So first we're going to start with our codings for detailed. So add in any detailed codings. So we just want to do an if detailed is null. In this case we actually want to say is not null. And detail.any. So we're saying if we have at least one for each coding in detailed, just go ahead and add it. So US core race extension dot add extension, and in this case we want to add URL detailed and the coding. That's pretty straightforward. Again, same thing we're doing here. We're just saying if you passed in a bunch of codings for detailed, let's use them. If we wanted to here, and again, this is a very large set, the detailed race. The best thing is obviously to validate this against the terminology server that'll have all this, and you can just ask it. But we can, if we wanted to, go ahead and start validating kind of the not quite as good, but at least give us something. We could check that the coding is from this URN OID, because everything is from there. We could check to see if it's excluding these 5, because that's not very painful. And we could check if we wanted to. We can see these are all, 4-digit number dash 1-digit number between 1000-0, and it looks like the highest one here is 2131. You can make a regex to validate all of that. It's not something that's going to be super generatable, so that would be something you would want to add on your own if you were validating these things. And I'm not going to take the time to do it right now, but do know that those things, especially as you're building out, if you want it to be very robust and you want to validate data without a terminology server, you can do things like that. But let's not worry about it right now. Right now we're just going to say anything you pass me I'm going to assume is valid, because that's the world we live in right now. So that was the easier one. We also need to do this same thing for OMB categories. So the first part is just as trivial. We can do an OMB, OMB coding. This is wrong. This is supposed to be OMB category. There we go. Does not equal null, and OMB category.any. So we just want to check to see if we have anything, and then we want to traverse them the same. So here we're doing, I don't even remember what we called them, US core OMB race category values. We'll call it enum value in OMB category, because we want to make sure. we obviously can't pass this in. So really what we need to do is just add a helper function. And what that helper function would look like, private, and it's probably staticable. We need it to return a coding, because that's what we need there. And we need it to US, well, we need to give it one of these enums. So let's do something like to coding, and we can actually get rid of that. That looks better. And we'll take in one of these, which is just value. So the nice thing here, we can just do a switch, and we can switch on value. And doesn't it, I don't have it set up to autofill those. That's annoying. In my Visual Studio Full, I have it set up so that it'll auto-populate with the all of the values from an enum. But we don't have that here, so we're not going to worry about it. So for now, we'll just type 1 in first, and then I will not make everyone watch what we're doing. And actually, we don't want to break. Now that I'm thinking about it, we want to just return. And we can create a new coding. And let's see, we have the race categories. Now we only have 2 systems here, but same thing. There's no real reason to type these in even several times. So let's go ahead and add them. And all I'm going to do is pick up these 2 values from here and add some constants for them as well. These will do private consts. We can make them public in case anyone ever wants to use them. So we can do public const string. We'll prefix it with system so we know. And all I did was click on that URN oid, and it brought me to this other page, code system CDC rec, which is CDC race and ethnicity. And so we can just put system CDC race ethnicity. Yeah, we can actually even name it the same way. System CDC rec. We'll just do that. And that's that URN oid. And then we have system, the other system we have is this null flavor. And if you click on that link, it will show you that as well. So system URL for grab this CDC race and ethnicity, and we can do the same thing here. Oh. We'll just copy and paste. I don't feel like typing that. I don't know why it would work for one and not the other. And for HL7, what is it? V3 null flavor. And I think it's just this. Let's make sure. Yeah, when we type it in, it's null flavor from HL7. And it has this URL here. Perfect. I like that better. All right, so we can come back down to where our code is yelling at us, and we can put in our system CDC rec. Now our code, we'd grab these in here, and so the easiest thing is just to copy and paste them from there and grab them again. So this one is 1002-5, and we can put in the nice displays. And again, these are just values we're grabbing from here. So you can see it has the display, it has the code, and it has the URN. Now I had typed these up during prep for the same reason, so that everyone doesn't have to sit here and watch as we type the same thing over and over again. But I did use a different system name. So let's replace those, and then we can see that. So we covered all of our cases from our enum. So we're just returning a new coding with the right system, the right code, and the nice display for each of those. Now that said, you can see it's still yelling at us because we don't return a coding, but that's okay because we actually don't want to. If we don't have one of the enum values we know about for now, we'll throw or unhandled US core OMB race category, and we can just pass in, and what is it, value. Perfect. So now we will yell at it. If someone passes this a null, if someone does one of those weird, runtime cast int type things that it gives a value that's not here, it'll throw an exception at us. So this, we just want to say convert OMB race category enum values to codings. I'll make a note here too. This is obviously one style of doing this, I'm not, we could pick, for instance, instead of creating an enum and using these, we could just as easily do something like public static read-only dictionary of string coding, and say, US core OMB category codings, and then just create a dictionary and put in all of these values as codings with their, and that's where part of the tricky thing comes in. You might want to put in these values, you might want to put in the codes, you might want to just create a list of the codes versus the names and put both. There's a lot of options there. And so definitely feel free to explore and play as you're going through and find kind of the best model for how you work and what you're doing. But this gives a good flavor of what we're trying to do. So now that we have the ability to make codings from these, we can just do the same thing we did below. We're going to add an extension instead of an annotation and use our OMB category and then give our enum value to that function. And again, it'll throw if anything's invalid, so we don't have to do any additional checking here. All right, so where are we? If we come back to our extension, we can see that there was a text, which we've done, an OMB category, which we've done, and a detailed, which we've done. And so we just need to actually add it. That's where we are here. So we do need to add it this way. You can see here we're using all of these nice helper functions. So you might be tempted to just add the extension, our, what did we call it? US core race. And actually, let's do that first so that we can see. Patient.set extension. And this we need to give it extension URL and that. So let's do this once so that we can see what happens. We won't ruin the suspense too much. So let's get rid of that, and then we'll come back here so we're doing things in the same order, and we'll say patient.uscore race set, and we needed text, so we were doing race default text, and we need to give it a list of OMB category values, which US core race dot that, and we'll just give it, we'll actually give it US core race dot unknown. And this is getting long, so let's clean up our formatting a little bit. And we'll even, yeah, that's not too bad. So we'll run. And this has what I know to be an error, but we'll run it first so we can see the error. If we look at first glance, this looks pretty good. I apologize for that. So we can see our patient, we can see our extension, we can see our US core birth sex, that's all there. And we can see our US core race, and then it has these extensions. The problem is that it has this extra value extension, and that's not supposed to be there. And the reason is because of the helper function we used here, this set extension, it sees that we're doing an extension and passes it in as the value. So we can't actually use this version. So what we really want to do is first remove the extension, in case there's one there. And then we can actually just go and add our US core race extension. And with this, when we run it, and I will highlight here the subtle difference. And so now you can see we just have extension, and then it has these other ones in it. And so that's the what we needed. Before we had the URL twice and a value extension because it was just wrapping things. Sometimes the helpers get a little too helpful. So this looks pretty good. We can go and set all of the values we want, but right now we have to set everything at once. And if we were doing this, we might want some additional helper functions, right? You know, if we just want to update, for instance, the text, we would have to go and grab all these values and pull them out and do everything in order to do that. So let's see what that looks like in a complex extension. Here we're going to go ahead and do a US core race. Now before we were doing US core race set, so now we're going to do text set. And we still need a patient, and we still need the text we want. We're going to go ahead and grab our two null checks from before. And then, because if we either don't have a patient or we don't have text, we don't want to do that. So set the text on an existing US core race extension, and we'll leave that there for a second. So the first thing we need to do is figure out if we have one. Now again, if we look at US core race, we are only allowed to have 0 or 1. So more than that is invalid, and yes, there'll be plenty of times that you want your code, and maybe even in this case, you'll want your code to check for those kinds of things. But in this case, I'm not going to worry about it because we're going to assume that we're constructing this properly, and we have a kind of closed system where we don't have to worry about it, and we're building demos. So in this case, we want to just ask to get the extension for our extension URL. And that'll give us a US core race extension, or it'll give us null. So here's where we need to decide. What do we want to do in the case of null? If you went to set the text and didn't have one of these, I'm going to lean towards or adds a new US core race extension. The reason being, this is actually the only required value in this whole thing. And so if you were just trying to shorthand and typed this one instead of the other one, we can add it. We already know what's there. We don't have to go and invent any values or anything. So it makes sense to me to just do this. So in this case, we can just do set, and we can pass in our same patient and our same text and return, because we're done. So in the case that you didn't have one already, we'll just create one and go from there. Unfortunately, that was the easy case. But actually, well, not too bad if we think about it. Text is a one-to-one extension, so it only has a scalar. And so here we can use those nice helper functions again if we want. And so we can just set the extension, because at this point, remember, we know we have a value here. And so we can just set with URL text the text that we were passed in. But same thing, we still need to remember to wrap things in a FHIR string. So if you ever are concerned about forgetting things like that, that's why we have IDEs, because as you can see, I forget them all the time too. Perfect. So in this case, if we comment this out, and we just come here and do patient US core race text set, now we can say just text. Now if we run this, we should get a new patient, and we see we have text with just text. And if we have an existing one, we'll change this to updated text so that we know it is. Perfect. We can see we have our updated text, and everything's staying correct in the structure, and now we have the OMB category there since we had added it here. So that's great. We could do the same thing if we wanted to do a get, and we can use the same format we were using in the other one. So it's try. Did we do try? I don't remember the naming structure we used actually. US board try get. So we did US core race text try get would be the equivalent. Patient out string text. And we can do a similar type of thing here. Let's just copy from this to start with. If patient is null, in this case, text equals null and return false. And we can actually do the same thing. This one doesn't make any sense at all. Perfect. We try and get the extension. If it's null, then we want to just say same thing, text equals null, return false. And if it is, then we want to say text equals US core. So now we need to get actually the extension of the extension. So extension, text extension is US core race dot get extension URL text. And actually, I think there is and I'm trying to remember how this works off the top of my head. T, where T is a data type. So we should be able to do something like FHIR string, and we want to get of URL text. And then we don't need to do this extra. We can say text equals that. Actually, we need a FHIR string, and we'll call this FHIR text. I believe that would work. Perfect. And what does this return? This will return either a value or a null, I'm guessing. So if FHIR text does not equal null, we'll check and see if this is the right way to do it. Well, it's mandatory, so again, we don't need tons of error checking here because if you have a US core race extension, it should have the text here. But then we just say text equals FHIR text dot, what is it, value? Yep. And return true, and otherwise text equals null, and return false. So you can see now we have our nice try to read the text value of a US core race extension. And so we have our getter that we can use the same way that we have the other one. You can see it's a little bit more complicated than we had to do with US core birth sex, even though here we were doing the enums and everything, so we can get to that later if we want. But you know, the actual getting is just one layer because we get the extension. And here, because it's a complex extension, we have to get the first extension and then get the second extension. So that's just to be aware of if you're doing that. Same thing, if we wanted to, we'll do kind of one more function, I think, here, just because it's pretty fun and yet pretty complicated. And this, let's do the same thing, but if we want to add one of these US core OMB race categories. So this is US core race, and here we said text, so we'll do OMB category add. And we'll add a patient, and we need to give it OMB category no, just OMB category. Perfect. So what do we want this function to actually do? We want to add an OMB category to a US core race extension. So we can start with this same type of null on the patient because that's probably a good practice to do. Most anything we're going to want to do is actually going to use the coding. So I think we'll go ahead and grab a coding and say OMB category coding. And we have our convenience function for that to coding, and we can just give it the OMB category. So now we have the category we want in both the enum value format and the actual coding that we need to do. We are going to have to do the same thing. We can copy from any of our other places, but we're going to want to get the parent US core race extension object. So we definitely want that. And then we need to figure out what to do, just like here, if we have null. If we have null, we have a couple options. We could do something like generate a basic value here. We could throw. I think I'm going to throw because in this example, I'm not going to set up all the things to create and maintain that text value automatically. Because if you added 2 or 3 things in serial, you would want to be continuously updating and everything else. And that's a lot for the tutorial video. So for now, I'm just going to throw an exception. And I'm not even going to look for a nice exception. I'm just going to put this here and say cannot add, and I don't even need this, cannot add an OMB, cannot add a US core race OMB category without setting text first. You know what? That is what I would normally do, but I think it's more fun for the demo if we do it this other way. So we'll just do it this way. US core race set. We'll pass in the same patient that we have. We will go ahead and use, so we have the OMB category coding. We already have a display, and we want to add in this OMB category. So it's actually a new OMB category values array, and we'll just put the OMB category in it. Yeah, this is more fun. And then we'll return. So what we're actually going to do here, and like I said before, you can see I was thinking about just throwing, but instead I will actually put our display that we have for these codings in the text, and we can do that. I can put here something like this just as a warning so that we see it a little more clearly. Either way is fine. So that's the simple case, unfortunately, that we didn't have a US core race extension. So now what do we do if we have a US core race extension? Well, unlike text, which is 1 to 1, OMB category is 0 to 5. And so we have a couple of things we want to check. First is we want to check to see what's there in an array. We also need to make sure that we're not duplicating something else that's already in the array. So for me, the best way to do this is to go ahead and grab the list of extensions on there. And I think we can grab them specifically from those. Yes. So we'll put prior OMB category. And what we need to do is get, there we go, get extensions. And we'll use our URL for the OMB category. So this will give us, and maybe instead of prior, we can call it existing categories. Yeah. We just want to be careful and make sure that we have something that's clear to us to say that's what was there before we started. So get the list of existing OMB categories. Because we're going to do all of these things, the other thing that I think will be fun to look at is if we look in our OMB categories, there's this unknown and asked but no answer. And so we can actually remove those too. So we'll kind of show, just like we were talking about how we could do all those things with regex and everything else, we'll do a little of that here so we can see how much fun you can put into these kind of extension functions. So a list of, create a list of OMB categories we will use to set with. That kind of makes sense. So in this case, we will create a list, and we will say, can we call this OMB categories safely? Sure. We'll say we can. So, traverse the existing categories. So what we want to do here is we're going to look at, and we have a list of extensions. Well, we have an IEnumerable of extensions. And we'll just call it ext, just so that we know it's what we're doing. And we're going to go through them and see what we have. We have a couple of things that we can see here. So the first is, as we were talking about before, if this one already exists, we're done. We don't want to touch the list anymore. We don't want to do anything with it. So we want to check to see if our value would be a duplicate. And now, if we look in extension, we can see that we do have a value. But value is just a data type. And so we know that this is a coding. And again, this is the same thing in production code especially. You would want to do a little bit more than that. just saying, well, I know it's supposed to be a coding, so I'm going to cast it as a code and see what happens. You can check to see, if it's of that type and all those different things. I'm not going to worry about it right now. So we just want to say if our code is equal to our coding.code. And if that's the case, we're done. Already exists, nothing else to do. So that's a great escape. And now, like I said, it would be fun to check for categories we should remove. So same thing here, we can go and say, and again, I don't recommend this for production code without casting it or doing something. But here we can just say, look for our two null flavors that we added up here. And we can see there's unknown and ask but unknown, essentially. And so if we come back here, we can put those two in. And we're creating a list that we're going to use to replace. Now, the reason we're doing this, I don't know if I explained this sufficiently earlier, US Core Race can have a whole bunch of extensions on it. Oops, this is the window. So we can have 0 to 5 categories, we can have 0 to quite a number of details, and we can have a text. So we can't just strip everything out. We need to make sure that we're paying attention to the pieces we have, and there's no real good helper function to say, okay, find me the third OMB category in this set. It might be the 5th element, it might be the 3rd element, it might be the 6th element, depending on what else is going on. It would be a lot to keep track of. So what we're going to do is just generate a new list of OMB categories, remove all of our OMB categories, and re-add the list. It's just a little bit, I don't know, that's how I think I would do it. So we want to ignore any of those so that we can strip out the unknown and asked but unanswered. And then for everything else, we do need to put in a break. We want to add it. And so we said this was just called OMB categories. And we want to add the extension, right? So we're just repeating any of the ones that aren't these, so that we can keep adding them. Perfect. So as we just described, we want to remove all OMB categories. And that should be pretty straightforward because we can just use our US Core Race extension and remove all extensions with URL OMB category. And then we want to add our replacement ones. And again, we could skip this if we didn't want to do all of this, but it seems odd to me if you created it and had unknown and then you actually put in a value. And that's the kind of logic that we kind of want to get to in all of these things anyways. So we'll just do the same thing. And here we can say add the existing extension. We don't want to use the smart helper function because we don't want to create a new extension. We want to use an existing one. And then we never actually added the one that we requested. So add the requested category. So, and in this one, we can use the nice function because we are creating a new extension with our OMB category coding. Perfect. So we can see here, this is the US Core Race OMB category add. And so let's see what happens. If we come here to patient, and we say US core race OM category add, and we have these nice values. And let's say we add, we'll just start at the top and work our way down. Let's add 1 to C. So remember, we had set unknown, and now we went to add one of the other ones. And OMB category, we can see it removed the unknown and then gave us just the one we were interested in that we added, which was the top one, which is American Indian or Alaska Native. So in theory, if we add it several times, and same thing, we just keep going, working our way down. Let's try and add that one twice and another one. And now we can see that we have the one we added only once, and it added our additional code. It would probably be good to add here something to say you can't add an unknown if you already have a value. So for instance here, if we say, we can put a check here, and we could put a logic, kind of a break here, to say, you know, if we already have at least one value, don't add an unknown. Yeah, that wouldn't be too hard to add right here. It would be replacing everything first. We could do it before this. So, for instance, if we wanted to say if, let's say we already have some existing, so let's do OMB categories dot count is greater than 0. And so we want to see and OMB category is equal to unknown, or OMB category is equal to asked but no answer, then we don't want to add it. And again, this is the kind of thing that maybe this makes sense in your situation, maybe it doesn't, but we say don't add unknown if we already have a value. So that can help us here. So if we, for instance, try and add another one of these and add our unknown after we have some values now, it should, there we go, it didn't add it. And so that gives us that additional validation in these convenience functions to do some of this logic. I diverged a little bit from things that are auto-generatable, because I don't know how you would automatically generate this. Maybe you could with, since we know that those are null flavors, we could build something like that. But let's see what happens if we do this. If we go and get rid of almost all of these, oops. There we go. Don't type a bunch of extra characters. If we just try and add one at the start, we can see we have our generated text. And again, same thing, if we wanted to be clever, we could go, instead of saying generated text, we could go and say, you know, use the display value from the category, and then manage that, you know, check when we're going to add more if the text is the combination of everything that isn't, but you'd have to do a lot of string matching because of ordering and things like that. I don't see as worthwhile in this kind of a demo. So, same thing, if we wanted to, we could go through and add the OMB category remove, that just goes and removes one specific one, but we are coming up on an hour, so I think I'm going to go ahead and end this one there. This has kind of been a brief look at what complex extensions look like in code and what we can do to set up more developer-friendly code around it. Hopefully it helped. If it did, please like, subscribe, all those things. It does help. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know, and we will pick up next time. I will probably go ahead and add the remaining convenience functions just so that no one has to watch me type them. But other than that, we'll just pick up next time. Thanks for watching. Cheers.